Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar, Young People versus Billionaires, focused on the hidden costs of budget reconciliation. My name is Crystal Milam, and I'm the National Policy and Advocacy Director here at Young Invincibles, and we're excited to have you all here. I'll now turn things over to our Executive Director for some opening remarks.
Good morning, good afternoon. I see people coming in to the room. So I'll just give us a few seconds as everyone loads in. That's right, YI West represent. I love to see it. All righty, looks like we're around 50, we're good to go. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. If you are on the West Coast, or as most people call it, the Best Coast, good morning. For everyone else, good afternoon. I hope your day has been going fine. I'm Kristen McGuire. I'm the Executive Director at Young Invincibles, the nation's largest organization uplifting the voices of young people in the political process. We were founded 15 years ago in the fight over the Affordable Care Act, when some law students saw all of these politicians were talking about young people, but no one was talking to young people about healthcare. So they decided to change that. And today, YI is still in the business of making sure that young people have a seat at the table and that their stories and solutions are front and center in the decisions that shape their lives. Our motto here: no decisions about young people without young people. And that's the same energy we bring into this conversation today. So welcome to our webinar, Young Adults versus the Billionaires, the hidden cost of budget reconciliation. As some of you may know, right now, Congress is in the process of deciding whether to fund your futures or to give tax breaks to billionaires. And while some of us are struggling with rent, the cost of groceries, the rising cost of education, the elected officials that we put into office are considering cutting those essential programs like Medicaid, Social Security, Pell Grants, student loan debt relief, SNAP funding. All of that is on the chopping block. We're here today to break that all down. We'll talk about what's at stake, how it affects you, how it affects your community and your family, and most importantly, how you can take action. Whether that's sharing your story, contacting your elected officials, showing up online, or mobilizing your people, we want to make sure you have all the tools you need to fight back. And we're proud to be joined by our powerhouse partners at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. You'll hear from them shortly. But before we hop in, okay, so boom. I'm thrilled to announce and introduce the brilliant and very authentic voice of A.B. Burns Tucker, or as you may know her online as I Am Legally Hype. She's a political analyst, an influencer, a law school graduate who just passed the bar. She got her start by using her voice to uplift her brother Brandon's story, who was wrongfully convicted at just the age of 15. But what started as a deeply personal mission has grown into a national platform where she breaks down complex legal and political issues with humor, heart, and razor sharp insight. After becoming viral across all the social media platforms, she began to expand her content to include political topics, breaking down the Constitution, critical court cases, things that were being heard by the Supreme Court, and all these issues that were impacting Americans nationwide. So from decoding Supreme Court cases to demystifying budget reconciliation, she makes the law accessible, engaging, and relevant for young people. And that's why having her here today is so important. She's quite simply a force. And I'm so happy to have her here with us today. Soror, take it away.
Hello. Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for having me, Sarah. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to see like all the participants here. I think that's amazing. As Kristen said, I am a lawyer and I'm an influencer, and I got my start right after my brother was wrongfully convicted. And I remember after the verdict was read, I had sat through trial and I was like, wait, what happened? Because based on what I saw at trial, my common sense and my logic just didn't let me come to the same conclusion that the jury came to, right? And I had to realize that the reason why I didn't understand what happened is because I didn't speak the language of the law. Right. And so that's how things were able to get past me. I sat there and I thought solely based on emotion and logic and, my own common sense. Right. And that's just not how things work. And so I think it's amazing that you all are here because you get to learn the language of politics, right? And politics, like they change our everyday life. They affect our everyday life. You don't, I know a lot of people will be like, I don't do politics. Politics doing you. So you might want to do politics a little bit. But what I want to say is like, as a young adult, I'm glad that we're showing up, right? Because we waited so long to sit at the grown folks table when we was little. I don't know about y'all. When I was growing up, I used to go to my family parties and they'd be like, this is the grown folks table. And I couldn't wait to get there to see what they were talking about. But the reason why I wasn't welcome is because I didn't speak the language. And the reason why I didn't speak the language of grown folks is because I hadn't learned those lessons yet. As we continue to learn and educate ourselves and be in these spaces, what I believe happens for us is that we are able to make changes and we are able to help make decisions that are going to benefit us later in life. So a lot of old people running the show right now, right? And they've been there and they've done that. But we have to learn from them and we have to take those lessons that we learned from them and we have to apply it and we have to make a better America, right? A better country, a better life for people that are coming after us. That is our goal. And we have to follow in the footsteps of the people who came before us. So I don't want to do too much. I think I don't want, because I'll get to preaching on here. But I also want to say, last thing I want to say too is that make sure at the end of the day, enjoy this webinar, learn as much as you can, and just become as civically engaged as you possibly can. But also bring that to your friends and your family. All the game and the stuff that you learn right now, it is your duty to bring it to other people. The reason why I utilize my platform the way I do is because I had the honor and I had the privilege of learning the language of the law, of learning the language of politics by being in the rooms. And I think the way that I service other people is by teaching them and meeting them where they are. And I have seen the results of that. I have seen the results of people who are like, girl, I would have never got into politics if it wasn't for you. I would have never known what was going on. And people have been enlightened. And I think that helps to make a better world. I think it helps to make a better country. And I think it's my civic duty. So as you listen, as you learn, have fun with it, have fun with the information, really internalize it, and then take it back to your friends. And if you don't understand it, ask questions, please. Just ask questions. But I know this is going to be an amazing webinar. I'm excited. I'm grateful to be here. And I'm going to leave it at that.
Thank you so much. And thank you for that intro for us. I also want to make sure that I correct myself. We are actually having the Center for American Progress here as our partner today. And I believe that I misspoke and introduced the wrong organization. We have so many awesome partners and I just need to make sure I get that right. So yes, today we have the Center for American Progress and I want to make sure I pass the agenda along, but thank you so much, AB, for joining us today. I'm so excited. We finally got to partner with you. Your work is so important, and we really love how you are making politics and political decisions accessible to the American young people.
Thank you so much for having me.
Am I up?
Yes, you are.
Oh, hello. Sorry. Hey everyone, I'm Bobby. I hang out at the Center for American Progress. I do budget stuff. And so I'm going to talk about reconciliation. You don't need to know that it's called reconciliation. What you need to know is that Republicans are trying to push through a bill that would radically kind of reshape some fundamental parts of America. I'm going to talk a little bit about process and kind of what we can expect to see and where folks can be engaged. Next slide, please. Okay, so importantly, we got to know why this is happening. In 2017, when the last time Trump was president and he had a trifecta, they used reconciliation, they did the Trump tax cuts. And for reasons Some of them were made permanent and some of them were set to expire. About 2/3, the stuff that's some of the stuff for businesses, but most of the stuff that affects individuals is set to expire, and it's set to expire at the end of the year. So come January 1st, we revert to the old tax code, the Obama era tax code. And so Republicans are now trying to, this is their time. They're trying to change it before it reverts. And so that is the backdrop in all of this. But the important thing to remember is that these tax cuts are super disproportionately going to the rich, right? And so when I say super disproportionately, I mean the average two-person house, or the average household, which is for the average person, therefore is two people. The average household sees about $1,000 tax cut, and the average 0.1%er sees $250,000 tax cut. These are tax cuts that disproportionately are going to the rich. They give a pittance to some people. I mean, $1,000 is a lot more than a pittance, but like $1,000, to normies, $250,000 to the super rich, and like 28 million people don't see any tax cut at all. 14 million people actually see their taxes go up. It's not a tax bill that you and I were writing. We're going to figure out like how we would rework the tax code. It's not something that any of us would do. But it's something that Republicans did because they love giving away tax cuts to to the rich. So that's what this is. These are set to expire. And so they are using this process to try to continue them. They're really trying to make them permanent, and they're trying to do a whole bunch of other really atrocious stuff that would fuck over a lot of people. Am I allowed to swear during this? That would screw over a lot of people. Sorry, I gotta have my professional face on. That would now I'm flustered. That would screw over a whole bunch of people at the same time. So can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So reconciliation. The purpose of reconciliation is to avoid a filibuster. What's a filibuster? In the House, simple majority, baby, democracy in action. As long as you have a majority of people ready to do stuff, you can do whatever you want. But in the Senate, there's a filibuster, and it takes 60 votes to do anything. So it takes 60%. Not super freaking common to have 60 votes of the same party. So that means most of the stuff that can make it through is only bipartisan. But it's a special exception. Reconciliation, you can do stuff with only 51 votes instead of 60. So as a result of basically the partisan legislation that happens tends to happen through reconciliation. I wish I could take, the credit, but Alex gets the credit for adding in the Parks and Rec stuff. I'm pushing myself as a young millennial, I'm dating myself in this way, but they can do major legislation, and most of the partisan stuff has been happening that way. So the Clinton 93 deficit reduction bill was done through reconciliation. Bush tax cuts round 1 and 2, done through reconciliation. ACA Part 2, Dems had 60 votes for a hot second. So they were able to do some real major bills through regular order. But then Ted Kennedy died, and then Scott Brown won, and then all of a sudden they were stuck, and so they did ACA Part 2 through reconciliation. Republicans tried to repeal ACA through reconciliation. They failed, but they tried to go through reconciliation. Trump tax cuts done through reconciliation. Biden rescue plan done through reconciliation. Biden IRA done through reconciliation. You can do major things through reconciliation. Nowadays, it is only used to avoid a filibuster. As I say, you can do a whole bunch of stuff. You just have to stick to the rules. I'm happy to go into them if it ends up being useful to folks. But the answer is there are some rules. The stuff has to be budgetary. And then what it counts as being budgetary is actually a super big debate. And that's where a lot of this sort of thing can make it in, this sort of thing can't make it in. The thing you should have in mind is it's about dollars and cents. It's about destroying or creating spending programs or changing the tax code. And so that's what this is. That's what they're trying to do their agenda through this way. And therefore, it's very real. There's tons of stuff that we hear about and we say, God, this sounds scary, but it's going nowhere because it's going to be filibustered in the Senate. This legislation is real. It is moving. It is an uphill battle. It will require folks to be super engaged to prevent the bad things from happening, because even if 100% of Democrats vote no, this still can become law. You need to peel off a certain number of Republicans to stop this. Next slide, please. So, folks later in the panel are going to talk about things, but there are some major things that affect folks that are allowed, right? So they're trying to completely rework the student loan portfolio in an kind of pretty radical and untested way. All loans going forward, the power to shift everyone from how they've been paying to a new thing, totally doable through reconciliation. Right, in the 2010 ACA Part 2, they did a Pell Grant increase and they switched from loan guarantees to direct student loans. That's normal fucking government spending. The government is, instead of being a loan guarantor when you were doing stuff with your bank, now the government's making loans directly with you. This actually ends up being really helpful for us because that's why we had the authority to do some student loan cancellation, that sort of stuff, because all of a sudden we were the direct loans baby. So the things they want to do are all fundamentally budgetary in nature. We're changing the contracts that we're making. Like, that's a budgetary thing that's all allowed and super spooky. Medicaid cuts, obviously allowed, right? They're trying to do the largest Medicaid cuts in US history. Currently, that honor goes to Ronald Reagan. No shit, right? Of course it's going to Ronald Reagan. He's the one who did the biggest cuts ever. Trump wants to do significantly more. Right. And even if they pare it back to a mere 500 billion, still the largest Medicaid cuts in US history that will be kicking millions and millions of people, maybe more than 10 million people off of their health insurance. And really, it looks like they want to go after the population that is like, the expansion population, which affects many of us. SNAP, same sort of thing, right? Biden kind of did a unilateral SNAP increase that took it from a meager $1.67 per person per meal to a still super meager $2.06 per person per meal. They want to take it back and they want to shift the costs onto the states. And in doing that, maybe kind of allow states to drop a bunch of people, right? Very, very, very spooky thing that would endanger a whole bunch of stuff and make food insecurity, which is already a major problem in the United States, even worse. So those sorts of things, all allowable in reconciliation. Plenty of other things are not allowable in reconciliation, but these sorts of things are all allowed and they're all very, very real. Next slide, please. So process. They reconciled a bunch of committees. What does that mean? They instructed certain committees, hey, find some deficit reduction, or in some cases, deficit increases, right? Inside of this, they also want to give like an extra $73 billion to ICE, right? So they're literally upping their deportation squad while they are cutting Medicaid and SNAP. So there are some committees that were instructed to spend more. There were some committees that were instructed to spend less. And then there were the committees that were instructed to do giant tax cuts for the rich. So you can only write legislation from the reconciled committees. And at least one chamber has to go through the full committee process. That means it's going to be slower than it might otherwise be, right? It's not going to be done in a week or anything like that, because at least one chamber, and I'll get to this in the next slide, at least one chamber needs to go through the full committee process. They could both do it, but it can't be the case that each of them just goes straight to the floor. And this is a tax bill, so the Constitution requires that the House goes first. Normally, the House might have some bill, it's sent it over, and then the Senate can strip everything out. But it has a tax provision, the Senate can strip it out and then just go first. Not for this process. In this process, the House needs to pass a reconciliation bill, send it over to the Senate. And as I say, one of them will have to go through the full committee process. And so now I'm going to talk about that full process and where we can get engaged. Next slide, please. Thank you, Alex. Process part 2. So first step, already done. Both chambers need to pass an identical budget resolution. That's sort of the framework. It's not a bill. That's the framework. This happened, I think, earlier this month. That was where they were trying to work on the contours and they were disagreeing because the Senate was afraid of doing too much in cuts, and the House said, yeehaw, this is our only chance to, rip away healthcare from people and rip away food from people. So they were kind of fighting about that, but they now have agreed to the overall framework. Now we are in the markup process. This has been happening this week, and we started getting text last, over the weekend, and some markups are already concluded. So what is markup? As I said, each of these committees have been instructed to find savings. So for instance, let's take student loans as an example. Education and workforce was instructed to find at least $330 billion of deficit reduction. They walked out of there with text that was $341 billion in deficit reduction, TBD. That's kind of a preliminary score, but they went above and beyond. They love to make students' life more difficult. The committee presented their text, and just the members of the committee tried to amend it, and then they voted it out of committee. That one's done now. Ed and Workforce is done. But the various other committees that are still working their way through have to do that. They have to vote it out of committee. So Medicaid is in Energy and Commerce. Energy and Commerce hasn't released text yet. We need to get involved and try to convince all of the Republican members, don't support this legislation. Don't do this thing that's the largest Medicaid cut ever, right? So Energy and Commerce is Medicaid, still needs to go forward. Agriculture, which is where the SNAP, the food stamps cuts are coming, that's another place to get involved. So every single committee, we have a chance to stop them. And if we stop even one of the committees, they are on pause until they can figure it out, or they need to abandon the part of that committee. So any single committee, if we can stop any of them, we are on pause, or they are on pause. If they can make it through every single one of those authorizing legislating committees, then it goes to the House Budget Committee, and they don't get to amend it. They just do thumbs up, thumbs down. Same thing. You can get the Budget Committee to stop. If it makes it through the Budget Committee, it goes to the Rules Committee. Rules is going to set rules. But once again, if you can't make it to the Rules Committee, you don't know what, then they are stuck. And then finally, it goes to the House floor. And that is where every single member, instead of just the committee, is, can be stopping them. That is where when Republicans were trying to repeal the ACA in 2017, they got stuck on the House floor for months, right? They'd made it through the full committee process, and we didn't stop them at the committees, but then they got stuck on the House floor for months. They didn't have the votes. They failed in March, and then they finally succeeded in May. So if that happens, they go through the whole thing, then it gets sent over to the Senate. Senate might choose to go through the committee process, but as long as the House went through the committee process, then the Senate can go straight to the floor. There's 20 hours of debate, and you can yield your time. So really, it could be only 10 hours of debate. That's what happened when they did Trump Tax Cuts 1.0. There was 10 hours of debate, which is shorter than the Lord of the Rings special extended edition put together, right? Is less than that. And then you go to the floor, you do this process known as vote-a-rama. You do this process known as vote-a-rama, where you go until all 100 senators agree to stop doing amendments, but you can't leave. So you can't, it's unlike a filibuster where you can just kind of go on for forever. There is the whole process will be 20 some hours, and then it's over. That is where we won on ACA repeal. That was where John McCain and Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski all voted no. And there you go. That was what killed it. And so this is the kind of final, well, I don't want to say final, this is another place to kill it. After the Senate passes it, if they're able to pass it, it will have to go to the House one more time. Take my word for it. Remember, I said there were some specific rules about what's budgetary. I 100% guarantee the House passed version, if they're able to pass it, there will be at least one provision in it that is not allowed in the Senate rules. And so they will have to strip that out. And so then they will either have to go to conference or, vote through the House again. So we basically have a few different key places we can be involved. You can call the members involved in it. You can show up at the committee and protest outside. You can call your Republican governor to call the individuals, right? Because the governors are if they are putting SNAP costs onto states and they are pushing more Medicaid costs onto states, the governors are not going to be happy that they are going to be stuck with a whole bunch of costs or uninsuring their own citizens, right? So there are actually tons of different ways to be involved. It is just an uphill battle. We won last time on ACA repeal, and we lost on the tax cuts. This one is the worst of both worlds. They are simultaneously cutting taxes to the rich and taking assistance away from needy Americans, right? Double, the worst possible thing. If this were to pass, it would be the single largest transfer of wealth in a single bill from the poor to the rich in US history. It would be the single, most regressive bill in US history if this passes. But it's still an uphill battle, so we need to be super involved. I think that was my final slide. There might be another one after it, but I think that's the final slide. So I now open it up to questions if anyone has any, but no worries if not. Oh, can't they ignore all the rules? So fun question. The Senate has a bunch of rules, and it only takes 51 votes to break a rule. So, as an example, it takes 51 votes to appeal the ruling of the chair to fundamentally rework to break the filibuster. You can do that, but I will just say these people have an opinion about their rules, and the rules let them do a lot of what they want to do. They can do tax cuts, and they can do Medicaid cuts, and they can do food stamps cuts in reconciliation. So why do you need to break the rules if you can already do a lot of what they want to do? There are some things they can't do. Some of the really, really, really nastiest anti-immigration, they can do a lot of nasty anti-immigration stuff in reconciliation, but some of the really nastiest, most like, perverse and psychopathic immigration stuff that they want to do, they can't actually do through reconciliation. So that's a limitation. But basically, once you start breaking the rules in the Senate, it's over. Like it really, 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 it's a big change. So a lot of them are really uncomfortable with breaking Senate rules, and they can get a lot of what they want to do in it. Yes, 51 votes can do anything, but once you're at the 51 votes can do anything, you have nuked the filibuster, and they are very uncomfortable with that. Are there any committees that take precedent over others? It's not, I wouldn't say it takes precedent. Basically, all committees write their stuff, they get stapled together into a full bill. And then we're voting yes or no on the bill. So there are committees that like we care more about because they're affecting the things that we right. So like energy and commerce is where the Medicaid cuts are. We are going to be focused on energy and commerce. Ag cuts or ag is where the SNAP cuts are. We're going to be super focused on ag. And just say depends on your issue area, right? So I was reading the judiciary text 2 days ago, yesterday. My brain doesn't work anymore. You can tell I'm a little manic right now. The judiciary had all the ICE budget increases. So I was looking for that. They are doing $150 billion like giveaway to the military. That's like something you could care about, or you could say, I'm not looking at this, I'm looking at this other stuff instead. I would say it's a person. Ways and means is where the tax cuts are. Thank you, Alex. Right. So like that's where we're going to be seeing their like shitty tax legislation that is giving a whole bunch to the rich and basically nothing to the rest of us. So we're going to be seeing that sort of stuff. But they don't really take precedent. They just all get stapled together.
Are there
If
any
there are
other
no more
questions for Bobby? All right, seeing none. Bobby, thank you so much for that presentation. I feel like I learned so much about the background and reconciliation. I'm excited to now turn things over to my colleagues, Alex and Mina, who will give us some information on how this process directly impacts young people.
Hi, everybody. My name is Mina Schultz. I'm the Health Policy and Advocacy Manager here at YI. I work with the national policy team on anything from reproductive health to mental health to costs of healthcare for young adults. So I'm going to give just kind of a brief wrap up, a little summary of what Bobby went over. And then I'm going to pass it over to Alex, and we're going to go back and forth telling you kind of exactly how these cuts are going to impact the programs that we all care about. Next slide, please. So again, this is a summary of what Bobby went over. As of now, the House and the Senate have agreed on a budget resolution. So that means that the committees involved in reconciliation have gotten their instructions for the dollar amounts that they are tasked with cutting from the programs that they oversee. Committee members are now going to hold markups where they determine which programs will be cut and how. And you'll hear that some of those markups are already complete. The first round. This will actually make it a really good time to make our voices heard about the necessity of these programs for young adults, just, while the initial debate is going on. And just remember, the dollars taken from these programs will fund the extension of Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, handing over huge amounts of money to the richest in our country at the cost of our access to health, education, food, and basic needs. So with that, I'm going to hand the mic over to my colleague, Alex, to start us off on the programs that are looking to be cut.
Hi, everyone. Mina, that was a great summary of Bobby. I really appreciate it. My name is Alex. I'm the Federal Policy Manager over here for Higher Education, Workforce, and Financials. And so as Bobby touched on in his presentation, and as Mina just relayed, the committees have their instructions, and actually the Committee on Education and the Workforce just met yesterday to mark up their version of the reconciliation language they put forward into that larger bill Bobby talked about. They marked that up yesterday and actually passed it out of committee. So they've now referred it to the Budget Committee to package into the larger bill. And so I don't think it's a coincidence Republicans started there. Typically, they're supposed to go through like a certain committee order. But I don't think it's not surprising they started with education and workforce, because the cuts they made in the markup and in the reconciliation language they put forward are going to be massively unpopular, and they actually target everyone, really, to be quite honest. So specifically, one of the most damaging things is within federal student aid, some of you who are college students or some of you who are graduates and possibly seeking grad school, is they messed with the loan amounts. So the annual loan amounts you can receive in federal aid, they lowered the cap on all of those. And they actually shifted around how they calculate the actual amount of need you receive for your program. And so typically that's done now on like the calculation for that is done on an individual basis, right? So like it's per what program you're applying for. The cost of attendance for that program includes everything like tuition, everything for your personal cost to attend that program, right? The government kind of will give you aid to help you with that cost. They shifted to calculate how much aid you receive based on a median cost of college for that program across the country. So essentially what that means is for someone, for example, who did really well in high school and wants to go into engineering and wants to go to MIT, MIT is a highly competitive institution. And if you manage to get into MIT, they're going to charge you for getting into MIT because it's highly competitive. Your job prospects are better, right? And under this new calculation, the amount of aid you would get would be dependent upon the average or the median cost of a engineering program across the country, as opposed to the individual cost for you attending MIT. So really what that does is it's going to limit access to higher education, especially for people who come from and students who come from low-income backgrounds or marginalized backgrounds. It's going to limit people's ability to attend really prestigious institutions or programs they're really aspiring to attend, or really competitive programs, because the competitive programs can offer or charge more for tuition because it's a competitive program. The prospects are better for you post-graduating. And so additionally, what they've done is they capped the amount of graduate loans you can take out, and they cut an entire Grad Plus program. So unsubsidized direct loans are typically what you can use to go to grad school. And then there's the Grad Plus program, which is like if those aren't based on need, financial need necessarily. So like your income, they're just based on if you want to go to grad school, you can take out loans through that. They completely eliminated the Grad Plus program. So they are effectively reducing access to graduate school and professional programs for undergraduate students who might want to consider going to master's, or for current working professionals who have their bachelor's degree but want to go back to school. And then additionally, with Pell Grant eligibility, they shifted around the full-time status. So typically, the Pell Grant program allows students to kind of operate, who are eligible for a Pell Grant, to operate on a full-time status of 15 semester hours per year, and they bumped it up to 30. So you don't have to do the calculation. That basically is that the 30 semesters hours a year fits the definition of what we would typically know as a full-time student. And the reason that's damaging is because Pell Grant program students typically are working part-time, because college and getting to college was already a financial challenge in the first place. And so they have to work part-time or work their way through school part-time. And so they typically are on a part-time status so they can afford to continue their education, though they might, be in school longer. The ultimate goal is to get their degree. And we don't have the exact numbers on this yet, but, there's estimates out there right now that estimates millions of eligible Pell students will lose access because of this change in rule. which means not having Pell Grants in order to afford to go to college. And then lastly, damaging to all of us who are current graduates is they eliminated several student loan repayment options. So those are things like SAVE, income contingent repayment plans, pay as you earn plans. If you're in any of those plans, they're essentially consolidating those into one repayment option. And unfortunately, based on how they've structured that repayment option, it's about 15% of your discretionary income. So for some of us who are like on SAVE, it could almost triple your payment amount. And the repayment options weren't great, and the loan terms are longer. So it's like balances are forgiven upwards of like 30 years now. If you're still paying 30 years, eventually your balance is going to be forgiven, as opposed to some of the other more repayment options we have now that are a little friendlier in terms of that. I'd like to just illustrate lastly before I pass it back over to Mina, is this is really the cuts we saw come out of the committee are a reduction in access to college and really an access in economic mobility within the country. And it's a reversal in terms of going backwards in time and saying that higher education is really a privilege of the wealthy and who can already afford it, based on the committee language they put forward yesterday. And as Bobby touched on, right, like reaching out to these reps while they were having the markup would have been really useful. But that's not to say that reaching out to reps now on this language isn't also useful, because as Bobby touched on, the House will have to pass the full reconciliation bill. So now that we have specific language we can point to, even reaching out to members on this language now, knowing what we know they actually want to do is great talking points when we reach out to general members about like, hey, don't support this larger reconciliation bill. But I'll happily pass it back to my colleague Mina to go over the healthcare cuts.
Thanks, Alex. That was wonderful. I'm going to be talking, like Alex said, about some of the healthcare cuts, which predominantly will be affecting Medicaid. Just to kind of level set, Medicaid is a federal program that pays for healthcare for a lot of folks with low incomes, and states and federal government share the costs of that coverage. So I just want to put that out there up front. So members of the Energy and Commerce Committee have jurisdiction over Medicaid. I think Bobby mentioned that, and they have been tasked with cutting $880 billion. The members of that committee are debating the program cuts as we speak, and that decision, the text for that is expected sometime next week. Just for some background on Medicaid, there are currently about 80 million people who depend on Medicaid for low and no cost healthcare. These folks are predominantly low-income children, seniors, people with disabilities, pregnant people, and in most states, low-wage workers. For young adults, especially in expansion states, those are states that have expanded their programs to cover more people. This means millions of students, people just graduating between jobs, or just those who simply are working jobs that don't offer health insurance. They'll be hit especially hard with medical bills, on top of all the financial challenges that are happening these days. The latest update is that the committee may end up actually cutting less than $880 billion, but that's not okay. We're not going to accept that. Even a lesser amount, it's going to be mathematically impossible for them to make those cuts without cutting Medicaid, and it will still cause millions of people to lose their health care. There are a few different ways that they could go about making these cuts to Medicaid that they're still discussing. One of which is adding work reporting requirements for enrollees. So they have to prove that they're working or exempt from work. And that just adds additional paperwork, hoops to jump through, and it's just a barrier to access to healthcare. Another way they're thinking about cutting is reducing the amount of funding that the federal government contributes to help states pay for the program. A funding cut for this would mean the expansion states, those who have expanded their programs to more people, those more people are the ones who would be impacted by this. For the moment, those cuts to expansion is what is being looked at most closely. Doing that would leave a huge hole in state budgets. Most, if not all, states would not be able to fill that gap with their current budgets, and that would, cause them in turn to have to cut benefits and or enrollees. So there's actually a talking point going around amongst members. We're already hearing, you've probably heard it. We're not going to cut Medicaid. We haven't cut Medicaid. We're not going to do that. Everyone who deserves Medicaid will have it. But essentially, if they're passing the cost on to states, they can say that it's the states that are going to be cutting the program. So it's not entirely, well, it's not at all true that they're not cutting Medicaid. As of today, there are actually still members in Energy and Commerce with deep concerns about their constituents losing their health care. They know that this is going to cause a lot of problems for a lot of people. They should have concerns. These cuts will actually mean life and death for some. A recent study out says that tens of thousands of additional deaths will be expected annually due to people not having that access to healthcare. And then, in addition to lives lost, which is horrible in and of itself, loss of Medicaid is going to increase medical debt as people can't afford their care out of pocket, and also harm hospitals, especially rural hospitals, who will lose the amount of funding that they need to continue providing services to their patients. That's just a brief overview of what's happening with Medicaid. We're actually going to do a deeper dive into Medicaid and SNAP towards the end of the month. So if you would like to learn more about advocacy and the, specifics of what's happening to Medicaid right now, we would love to have you join. I think I'm passing it back to Alex. I think you're muted, Alex.
Thank you. This is just to illustrate some of what we were talking about before with Bobby and the fact that these pay-fors or these programmatic cuts are being used to fund tax breaks for billionaires. This is one leaked current from the Committee on Ways and Means, so it's not set in stone. But this is one leaked suggestion they had of lowering the corporate tax rate, which in the first TCJA enactment was lowered from, I think, 34% to 21%. They've talked about lowering it to 15%. To put that into perspective for people, the lowest tax bracket in TCJA, so the lowest earners in America, gets taxed at a marginal tax rate of 12%. So under this proposed, new corporate tax rate, corporations would pay or be taxed at a rate only 3% more than the lowest earners in America. And the pay for that is your access to affordable student loan repayment options. Next slide. And so then as Bobby touched on earlier as well, the wealthiest in America on their return under TCJA currently gets about $250,000 back on their tax return compared to the lowest earner getting about $70. This budget reconciliation is an extension of this existing policy as it exists now. And the pay for is your access to Grad Plus loans or other financial aid if you want to go back to graduate school or go to graduate school for the first time. Next slide. And then this is Mina.
And yeah, Alex said it well, unfortunately. This is going to let corporations get a tax break for interest that they pay on debts. So it's not just wealthy individuals, the top income earners. It's also corporations that are going to be, making out with this kind of deal by cutting access to healthcare. Like I said, millions are going to stand to lose their coverage, their access to healthcare. Those who are, doing their best to work or, keep their families healthy. And again, tens of thousands of lives will be lost because of these cuts. Next slide.
Sorry,
I think that's Alex.
it is. I'm answering questions in the chat too. Sorry. So this is just to illustrate, this has actually been like, this title or verbiage is stolen from a newspaper article that people are calling this Congress's heist of the century. This is just a list of the pay-fors that are funding these billionaire tax breaks. So, we're talking about Safe Plan. They've mentioned reforming public service loan forgiveness, ending grad and parent plus loans, limiting the maximum undergraduate and graduate loan amounts, reforming Pell Grants, repealing the American Opportunity Tax Credit, limiting accessibility to SNAP, cutting access to Medicaid, changing tax credits for people who want to buy their own health insurance, all for the things we just talked about here, listing, lowering the corporate tax rate from 21% to 15%, giving the top earners $250,000 back on their returns, and giving corporations more in research and development tax credits, and letting corporations write off interest they pay on debts they hold. I think this just really illustrates again that, like, as we go through this process, you're going to consistently be heard and fed the narrative that these are tax breaks for taxpayer responsibility, giving money back to taxpayers. And what this really is it's massively propping up corporations and the wealthiest Americans on the back of social programs we all rely on daily, or someone we know relies on, and that no real economic relief is going to be delivered to us through this proposed tax package they want to extend. And that's why we're calling it the heist of the century, because they are telling you they're delivering you relief when they're really, like, taking money out of your pocket. And so then, next slide. I think we wanted to open it to any questions. I've been answering some in the chat, but if there's any more in the chat anyone would like to ask, happy to answer those while Mina and I are here. And then, as Mina mentioned, later down the line, we will have some webinars focused specifically on how you can engage with higher education and Medicaid as well in the issue areas. Awesome. Seeing none, can we go to next slide? Okay, so I have a question for you all. Are you mad now? If you're not, you should be. But if you are, great. We're going to channel that into some advocacy trainings. We had you, when you registered, pick a breakout room or an advocacy training you'd like to attend. And so you've already been assigned to that. And so you're going to be assigned to your breakout room, run by one YI staff on the call today. But if we could go ahead and put people in those breakout rooms, let's talk about how we can get engaged.
And learn some great strategies. Welcome back. Let's now use the chat to share one thing that you learned in your breakout room, or one thing you want to commit to doing to being active in the budget process. Let's see if we get some interesting things in the chat from what people learned in their breakout rooms. Okay, someone's working on their elevator pitch. Alrighty, someone's going to contact their reps, is going to step out of their comfort zone. Awesome, awesome. Someone else shared they learned about a phone number to connect them directly to their representatives. Excellent, excellent. Wow, you can definitely just show up to your rep's office or to committee hearings. That's right. Alrighty, we're seeing so many interesting things that people have learned in their breakout rooms with new strategies and new techniques. Well, we have come to the conclusion of our webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope you gained a better understanding of the budget reconciliation process and ways you can make your voices heard. As mentioned, We will have additional webinars in this series focused on higher education and another one on Medicaid. This information will be available on our website and on our social media platforms. Thank you again for joining us, and we hope to see you all again soon.